Hey guys, today we're going to remake March of the Pigs by Nine Inch Nails, and it's going to sound like this. The Downward Spiral was light years ahead of its time. Trent was exploring and pushing the limits of recording and production, and he developed some hyper-digital, really abstract production techniques, and still to this day, nothing else sounds like the Downward Spiral. So in this video, we're breaking it all down, what's going on with the weird time signatures, the unorthodox guitar approach, the crazy sound design. We're going to explore every trick used in this song to get the sound, so let's jump in. So the song starts with those kind of punk rockish drums, but before we even do that, I'm going to head to the master bus here and not how I usually would start a track, but I'm going to load up a tape machine. I love the sound of Ampex ATR, so we're going to use that. And the reason I'm doing this is because we know with this kind of downward spiral sound, we want the whole track to have that kind of gritty tape saturation in the end. So I'll leave this on the default setting, but we know we're going to need something like that, so I don't want to skip over that as a first little step. All right, moving on to the drums, I'm going to start with my usual Get Good Drums metal kit. Let's program it in and we'll talk about this crazy rhythm in a minute, but first we'll just lay it down. Then a tom. Fairly certain it's kind of a... Let's turn these right up and humanize them a little bit. So we just want to loop that, and on the fourth one here, instead of the floor tom, the beat's going to keep going like this. So we can loop that a couple of times, and that is our drum beat. And you can probably hear I've turned the room reverb on some of these tracks up quite a bit already, but I want to push that even further. Trent loves roomy drum sounds, and this song is a perfect example of that. So let's bring that up a little more. Then it starts sounding like March of the Pigs right around there. And let's just go a little deeper and focus on each drum a little bit to get them all closer to the sound. And the first thing is definitely the hi-hats. They need to be a lot more aggressive and harsh to sound like the song. So again, I'm going to reach for a tape saturation. Let's use the black box, and we just want to push this further. So that's parallel processing. We're not blending the whole signal, just using some of that. We do want to push it very far. This has to cut through the mix like a razor, but it still wants to be in a sweet spot. It doesn't want to be annoying for the listener, so dialing it back a little bit there. We really need those hi-hats to be aggressive, raw, and just sitting on top of everything else in the mix, cutting right through. Okay, coming to the kick now, I want to make some pretty big EQ moves. That Get Good Drums kick is a rock kick, so it's quite close to what we want. But like I was saying, we want a roomy drum sound. It doesn't want to be too in your face. It wants to be kind of rounded off in the mid-range. So I'm going to start by just rolling off some top end. We just don't need that harsh slap in the very top. Let's go for a really wide... That's a lot closer to what we want. We don't need that clicky high end, and we're just really focusing on that boomy mid-range here. And let's take that even further with a bit more reverb. We have some reverb already from the room mic, which sounds great, but we want to just kind of blend on main kick a bit more in with that, and we can get a little more specific using an actual reverb rather than the one in Get Good Drums. So I would say we want about a second, maybe a little bit less. A nice roomy sound, but we don't want all that pre-delay. Yeah, how that just fills out our kick. Definitely not a standard kick drum sound, but blended with the room mic, that's the exact kind of sound we want. And similar treatment for the snare. We want to roll off that top end. Just a little bit. Don't need any lows, and just boosting that little bit of crack. and that little bit of low mid-range, so it's a bit more boomy again. It's a very mid-rangey drum sound, so we're very much focused on that. And just like with the kick, we'll finish it off with a little room reverb. And there we have our drum sound. The important thing to note with that is definitely the room reverb and just rolling that top end off the kick and snares so that they're just really not in your face. They almost sound like they're being played in like a big room far away or something. And before we move on, we need to talk about the drums in this song because they're insane. The obvious thing that makes this song unique is that it's clearly an odd time signature. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. But it's not just that it's in 7, it's how Trent is using 7. Usually whenever a band writes a song in an odd time signature, I would say the goal is to kind of make it make sense even though it shouldn't. You know, music wants to be in 4s. It naturally falls into groups of 4. So you have to kind of find a way to make it groove. Tool is a band who are very good at this. They kind of write songs in weird time signatures and find ways to make it so the listener might not even notice that there's anything weird going on. Trent isn't doing that here. He's not trying to fool anyone. Instead of trying to make 7 work, it's like he's leaning into the wrongness of the odd time signature, which is why this song has such a mechanical, disjointed, erratic kind of sound. I mean, this is a very simple punk rock kind of drum beat. It's very easy to follow that in 4. But this is the genius of Trent Reznor. As soon as we get comfortable with the groove, it's like Trent just goes, nope, stop, reset every time. So every like 3 seconds, you go, oh, okay, no, this makes sense. What? And then it happens again. And you just want to hear that extra count, but you don't get it until... Finally, on that 4th bar, he gives you the 8th count that you've been wanting to hear and completes the full measure. He's basically just using this time signature as a way to make the listener feel uncomfortable and out of control, and so you just don't know what's coming next. Now, before we focus on synths and guitars, we need to lay down a couple of samples. You can probably hear in the intro, there's these kind of noise samples like... They're only subtle sounds, but I love what they do for this track because they kind of take something that would otherwise be like a pure punk rock thing and kind of add that digital industrial sound that we love 9 Inch Nails for. So I'm bringing in these 3 samples here that I'll quickly break down. So first of all, this is like a kind of industrial snare sample that I made. That's just got a load of bit crushing and reverb, and we're basically just using it as like a noise sound, just kind of like a in the distance. The second track here is the same sample, but you can see I've chopped it a little further and I've pitched this one down a little bit so we get this effect. That just adds a little more movement. And the only other sample, this is my favorite one, there's this kind of like vinyl scratch sound in the original. It's kind of like... It probably isn't a vinyl scratch, but it has that kind of DJ sound almost. So for that one, I'm doing something completely different. So let me just expand this to what it actually was. So this is just from a sample pack. It's just kind of like a riser effect. So I took that and turned it into this. So it's almost like this white noise kind of sound. And the reason I chose that random sample is because I just went to my samples folder and it was one of the first sounds I found that I was like, yeah, this'll be able to do it. So that's a good starting point, this kind of white noise thing. So from there, I wanted to just make it more lo-fi. So we're going to use retro-fi. Let me show you what this does. And again, that's just about making it noisier, making it feel like some destroyed piece of tape or something. But the coolest thing about this sound is definitely this plugin. So this is just like a UJam guitar plugin, not a sponsored video. I just really like this plugin, and it's kind of like a multi-guitar effects that just has so many different sounds. So we're using this one that's like a distortion with a kind of wah effect, which really gives it that vinyl scratch we're looking for. Love it. So in the mix, that sounds like this. And you can see on the 4th time, we've cut up this first sample to get that kind of rhythmic sound. Really throwing some random sounds and effects in there, but we're trying to think like Trent, and that's what he was doing on the Downward Spiral. So that's our samples. And next we're going to need a bass synth. And this synth sound is actually going to be quite a simple one. I'm using Vital, my favorite synth, and it sounds to me like a triangle wave, so that's what we're starting with. And then all I'm doing is some multi-band compression, really focused on the mids. to really squeeze it, and then just running that into some aggressive distortion. I've got this all the way up. Nasty. Super weird bass line too, like it's literally a C, C sharp, D, and D sharp. Like, not the nicest chord. But remember, Trent is not trying to keep it pretty here. He's trying to keep it unpredictable, uncomfortable. That's exactly what this is doing. All right, and let's just keep all of this going. Just loop it across. And now we're ready for Step Right Up. Those crazy, crazy guitars. And actually, just before we lay that down, I just want to put this hi-hat. Some 16th notes. I'll explain this in a second. Let's distort it a little bit. Let's use this one. Berserk distortion by Waves. That's just a sample from the Rock Kit in Cubase, very basic, and we're not going to humanize this, we're just keeping it consistent, because what we want from this hi-hat, I can hear it in the track as the guitars come in. This kind of hi-hat comes in more mechanical than the other drum kit, and what Trent was probably thinking here is, again, the same thing of kind of taking the punk rock energy and the kind of industrial energy and marrying them together, so it's not too human, it's still a bit robotic. Alright, now the guitar sounds, and what a crazy song this is for guitar tones. I'm just going to say now, I feel like I'm hearing like 20 different layers, so we're not going to go that deep today, but I think we can get something really close with just a few layers. If you're just listening casually, it kind of sounds like this da-na-na-na-na-da-na, da-na-na-na-na-da-na. But if you really pick it apart, you can actually hear that there's all different layers kind of dancing around, doing different things in the mix to kind of add to that impression of da-na-na-na-na-na-na. I'll show you. So the important thing to know with the kind of 90s industrial tones is that you don't always want to use a cab for the amp. One of Trent's signature tricks from the 90s is that he would record straight into the mixing desk from a guitar amp head or a distortion pedal and just completely forget about having the cab. So nothing to kind of round off and shape the tone. It was just distortion straight in. So we want to take our guitar DI, which you can hear is actually a little bit distorted already because of that tape recorder we put on the master bus. But we want to take that and I just want to run it straight into a guitar distortion. And the first thing that comes to mind for me for 90s industrial tones is the legendary and very meme-worthy Boss Metal Zone. So let's use the Brainworks Metal 2, which is based on a Metal Zone. And you can already hear that is like halfway there. Any kind of high gain amp without the cab or like a SD1 distortion is going to give you this kind of sound. But for me, it still doesn't really have that 90s Nine Inch Nails sound until you've added a little bit of chorus to it. Let's dial that up a little bit with this multiply chorus. That just takes the guitar even further into the realm of sounding like digital and metallic. And that's a great start, but the issue with this kind of tone is that it's kind of just pure distortion and noise. It's very thin, so we want to layer something to add a bit of weight to it. So for this one, I am going to use a cab, but we're going to really crank. You can see I've got this 6505 cranked. This is by Audio Assault. And I don't mean to insult this plugin, but this amp I find kind of sounds like those early amp sims where they sounded kind of obviously digital, not realistic, and just kind of cheap, which usually I would avoid, but for this kind of sound, this is what we want. And the same chorus again. So this one, it's a similar tone, but you can hear it's just got more balls in the mid-range. So the first tone was, and this. We want it to fill out the mix a little bit. We don't want the guitars just sitting on top with the cymbals. So that's the start of our guitar tone, layering those two together. We'll put it on the right as well. And let's just surgically go in and cut the audio like this. We don't need a human, natural sound. This wants to be super digital, almost like a synthesizer. Right, and here's where the guitars get a little more interesting. So here I have a duplicate of these tracks we had the 6505 on, and these are panned slightly left and right, and we're going to have a little bit of interplay with the guitars. This is what I was talking about, where if you listen carefully, the guitars actually jump around quite a lot. So here's what we're going to do. First on the left. This is going to be almost like a call and response between the two guitars. How Trent Reznor and his collaborators thought to do this stuff in 1994, recording to tape, blows my mind. Like, this guy, his brain was way in the future. The last important layer for the guitars is there's this kind of consistent background layer going on that again fills out the mix even more. So this one's really going to focus on that low mid-range more. And this one's just going to be like this. And that one might seem less important because it's not as upfront, but listen to the mix without it, and then I'll bring it in, and you'll hear how critical that tone is to the mix. It's really like an orchestra of guitar sounds here. It's all kind of working together to just create that cacophony of like industrial noise. So for that last tone, I'm just using the 14 Cali to get like a very Marshall kind of rock sound using this second mid-gain amp. And all I'm doing is just really boosting the low mids and the low end here with the EQ and not really focusing on the highs. So we really get almost like an overblown muddy mid-range, but with all those other guitars, it just fills things out perfectly. Okay, and now we're ready to drop it down. This next section is going to be a huge vibe switch up. We're going to trade the really erratic 7/8 sound for a darker, menacing 4 on the floor electronic kind of sound. So firstly, we need that pumping kick drum, and I'm just going to use the T9 kit in Cubase, which I think is based on a 909. Sounds like it at least. Nice and punchy, so that's our kick. And it's just going to be on the beat like this. And on top of that, we of course need that bass line, so it's going to be vital. Again, I'll break down the sound in a minute. So this one's going to be rapid fire 16th notes, and we're going to take it from D down to G sharp. Wouldn't be 9 Inch Nails without a flat 5th in there. Down to the 5th, and then F, the minor 3rd. We'll keep that loop in. All right, and this synth sound to me sounds quite sawtoothy, so the main sound that we have is a sawtooth wave. But it needs that low octave in there to give it that menacing sound. And for me, it sounded like that was somewhere between a sine wave and a square wave. Not quite as smooth as a sine, not quite as harsh as a square. So I'm using this clipped sine wave an octave down, and then we just have a sine an octave up to kind of fill things out. And again, just make it a bit more menacing, really give it that big octaved sound. And no surprises, but it's quite a distorted sound as well. So you can hear it needs that hard distortion. At this point, I am thinking it's possible Trent may have been kind of into distortion at this point in his career. Maybe. All right, next we need that big industrial synth sound that goes... You know the one I mean? Let me program in the note first, and then we'll break down the sound for that one. So this one's just going to be our root note of D. Let me program it in. And we're just going to slide the pitch down all the way like this. Okay, it's Vital Synth again. This one sounds like a saw wave again. So I've got these 2 saw waves, lots of voices. That's an important part of the sound. So it's kind of like a chorus effect. We don't want this thin little... We want it to be all-encompassing, huge sound. Blending a lot of white noise with this one again. If I turn this off, you'll hear it kind of goes... Whereas what we want is... almost sounds like crowd noise, you know, cheering in the background or something, and that's what we want. We want this impression of it being huge. So this one again has chorus just to make it bigger, pushing it with some compression, distortion, filtering the distortion to pull off that top end again to make it sound bigger, make it sound far away like this big crowd or something. And lastly, some reverb, you guessed it, to make it sound bigger. We need a couple more noisy samples and then we're ready for that little piano part. So here I have another kind of bit crushed, very 90s sounding snare sample that I made. Another very noisy, kind of abstract sound. But if you listen to this part of the song, there's actually loads more going on than just the synths and that kick drum. There's all this like stuff flying around, like weird sounds. So that's what we're going to try to emulate here. And with this one, we want to make it a little bit less of a duh, and more something flying around. So let's start with a mono delay and... that starts giving us that feeling of it flying around. And lastly, we'll use the cloner in Cubase, kind of like a chorus, just gives us like 4 separate voices, so it's even more fluttering around. Just gives it that industrial vibe, adds to the atmosphere. And we just need one more weird sound for this part. So there's kind of this, in the right channel, I can hear this grating sound that's almost like a printer or like some mechanical noise. So prepare your ears, I've put together this sound. So this is another very noisy Vital sound, and it's honestly quite a simple one, just 3 different octaves like we had before. very squared off waves, lots of white noise. So we're just getting this harshness, a lot of distortion again so that it's harsh. And then I'm just running it heavily into this bit crusher to destroy the audio and make it really digital. It's another really abstract, harsh sound, and it's not even musical, but it just adds to the overall experience of the song, keeps the listener feeling uncomfortable while all this other cool stuff's happening. And honestly, working on this track is really showing me why Trent went into filmmaking. It makes complete sense because he is a true master of painting pictures and really making people feel a certain way with the sonic textures he's putting together. Like the fact that a lot of these sounds aren't even pleasant, they're not musical, they're not really adding any harmonic or melodic content to the song, but in subtle ways they do. You're definitely not going to get that stuck in your head. Like, it's not very catchy, but it definitely adds something to the overall vibe. Okay, pianos. So this is another huge vibe switch up. This song does not let you get comfortable for a second. So it goes from that ominous dark section to this. And I love how Trent just leaves that to trail off into silence and then straight back in. So for that sound, I'm just using Cubase's Bright Acoustic Piano. Okay, I'm just finishing the edit and realizing I didn't really touch on this piano part too much, so I want to just go into that a little bit more. This is another really cool part of the song because once again, our expectations are completely set up through the whole song, and then when we get to this point, they are just shattered completely. We're building and building, going through all these minor, very dissonant passages, and then suddenly we just get this switch up into completely major. This is 3 major chords and nothing else. And I think for all of us, the first time we listened to this song, it was the least expected thing that could have happened. And just another way in this song that Trent is playing with our emotions and just keeping it unpredictable the whole time. And with that, I think we've done it, guys. That's every sound in this track broken down and replicated. Every time I do a Nine Inch Nails themed video, my respect and admiration for Trent and his collaborators just grows even more. The amount of thought that was put into this music and just the level of creative thinking that was needed to make this even possible in 1994 really blows my mind and inspires me to be more creative with how I approach my own work. So I hope you guys got some inspiration from it too. If you did, please hit the like and subscribe if you don't want to miss all the content I have on the way. Thanks so much for watching. Let me know below what else you want to see on the channel, and I'll see you in the next one.